Hey guys, it's Liv here, and in today's video, we're going to be ranking every Pokemon in the VGC Series 1 format that is currently legal. And if you enjoy this content and you want to see more tier list videos like this, leave a like and subscribe, and make sure you join the channel members page, where today I am actually going to be breaking down my first Scarlet and Violet VGC tournament and trying to use that as a learning experience for anyone who might be wondering what the best way to go about best of threes is, from where I did well and where I didn't do so well. So if you want to see content like that or any other discussion videos, whether it's on specific Pokemon, on specific types of ways to play the game, really whatever it is, I let the members pick usually, but this week in particular, I had an idea that I just wanted to run with. Make sure, of course, you hit that button down below. With that said, though, let's get into this. So I'm going to mention right now, this tier list I actually stole from Moxie Boosted. It was linked in his description. Wonderful VGC creator. I learned a lot of VGC stuff from Moxie, actually. But I'm going to try and keep this video a lot of my own opinions, of course. I don't want to just replicate a video that already exists. And this format also has evolved a lot since even just his tier list or any other Series 1 related tier lists. But with the format ending officially for the first part of it tonight, I wanted to do a bit of a retrospective and figure out what really did work this format, what didn't work, what could maybe work in future Series 1 or Series 2 formats, etc. And I want to try and break that down. So I'll label these actually really quickly just to keep them consistent with what we've done in the past for tier lists. So we're going to have our S+, S, A, B, C, D, and F, though I'm going to make this blue really quickly because I just like making it blue. We don't need two different greens, and we're going to do this one purple because purple just looks better. There we go. So with that said, let's get started, of course, with our... Actually, hold on. I need to make this one orange, this one red, and then this one pink. Because, again, just like the colors better. So with that said, though, let's get started with our very first Pokemon, Venomoth. So Venomoth is a okay-ish Rage Powder Pokemon, albeit Venomoth does have a lot of competition from other Pokemon, like, for example, Amoonguss, which even after the series has ended, still reaches a whopping 22.95% in this ladder. To put in perspective, that somehow only puts it at the 8th spot overall, which is kind of insane to think about, but it's just by far and away the best Rage Powder option. And while Venomoth I think does have some use, well, not use because it's not getting used, well, I think it has some purpose. Ultimately, I think it's just so heavily outclassed, it's going to be in the D tier. Cloyster's up next. Now, Cloyster's something I'm kind of surprised we didn't see get a little more usage, at least. For one, if we look at a lot of the top Pokemon, stuff like, for example, Garchomp and Meowscarada especially, Cloyster would be a decent way around that on a potential Tailwind team, especially being able to break stuff like Meowscarada Sash. So I'm kind of a little bit shocked to see that we didn't just see like a Tailwind Cloyster with like Icicle Spear running around, albeit I will say there's definitely some better options for this. Like, for example, Baxcalibur would be a better option, and it's a decently better one at that. But even still, I'm just kind of shocked that more people didn't at least attempt to make Cloyster work. This will definitely also be going into D tier, I think. Chansey's definitely an F tier this gen. Recovery moves losing a lot of what made them actually valuable. Not only this, but Chansey, if I remember correctly, also lost options like Ally Switch, which kind of sucks for it. It actually makes it a really bad Pokemon, considering this could have potentially been a really bulk Ally Switch option for like Perish stall teams. But sadly, though, again, you just don't have the option anymore. Whereas if we look at stuff like, for example, Generation 8 VGC, we can look into that, or even just like Generation 7 VGC, and we see that Chansey does have Ally Switch. It no longer has it, though. Definite F tier. And I'll just save some time right now because obviously we're going to be going into a lot of different Pokemon, and a lot of which are also going to be in some way, shape, or form repeats. We'll move Blissey there as well for literally the same reason. Chansey just has a Violate, which I guess in some way, shape, or form works. But next up is Grafaiai. Grafaiai, I think, is pretty niche, if nothing else. Prankster is objectively something that will keep it out of the D tier, since it does have some cool options here. For example, it's a okay-ish Parting Shot user, but again, Grim getting Parting Shot just significantly outclasses it in this department, even if Grim also isn't exactly the best Prankster option this gen, which I'll get into that in a little bit. But Grafaiai, if nothing else, does have a few other things going for it in terms of a move pool. For one, this has some cool options like Super Fang, which are decent for breaking through really fat walls. But ultimately, I just think that if you're not using this thing for Doodle with like a Slacking, it's kind of shit. And it's just outclassed by a lot of other Prankster options. It's not to say that it's unusable, but I just think that objectively speaking, you would only choose to use this over something like Grim for Doodle, or even Murkrow. Murkrow's, again, just another really top tier Prankster mon. Definitely in the C tier, in the D tier. I think the mons it enables are a little bit more valuable, but Grafaiai itself is a D tier mon. Tauros Blaze. Tauros Blaze is decent. This has some cool merit. For example, unlike Paldean Water Tauros, this is decent for getting around Amoonguss without having to go for Terra. It's also cool for stuff like Meowscarada, for example. I think it's actually a half decent Pokemon. We're going to put it in the C tier. Albeit, I do think that Paldea and Water Tauros does match up a little bit stronger, just defensively speaking, and as an Intimidate option, I think it's pretty cool. But that's not to say that Tauros Blaze is exactly bad. I just think that realistically, the Water Fighting typing, I think, is a little bit better, even if Fire does have some merit against certain things, as I said, like Gholdengo, Yaskarada. Well, actually, I don't know, I feel like they're both pretty decent. They're both going to be in B tier. Again, I'll save the time. I think they just check different things. Albeit, I know at the very least that Water is currently being used more right now, but I still think that overall the mons that Fire does check are still pretty valuable, because we just listed through a ton of the most used Pokemon, and Tauros Fire does a decent job at sponging them, in my opinion, especially if you were to throw on something like an AV. Yaskarada and Gholdengo being two of the most used for one, that's pretty valuable. You could potentially go for something like a Terra Fire, and Terra Fire would have a strong benefit in this case of being a really strong way of sponging stuff like Sylveon, especially with the Salt Vest. You have Terra Water you have fucking Dondozo Water, which is probably a slightly better option for checking mons like Garchomp, and with Terra Water, you could potentially even use this as a strong Arm Rouge sponge. But I mean, even still, I feel like they both just check different things. Like, for example, I would probably, well, they both have a lot of stuff they mutually check as well. Stuff like Arcanine, they're both pretty good checks for, but ultimately, I think they're both just pretty decent B-tier Intimidators. Speaking of B-tier Intimidators, though, Gyarados. I think Gyarados is also a strong B-tier Intimidate option. Gyarados does have a lot going for it. I will say, I think a lot of people went at this gen thinking that Gyarados would be a lot better than it actually is. For example, the fact that a lot of people, I'm sure, thought that stuff like Terra Flying and Ground would be amazing Terra types with this thing, with Terra Flying giving it a strong flying stab, meanwhile Terra Ground giving it a really strong immunity to its 4x weakness. But ultimately, I think that Gyarados just kind of got fucked over by the fact that Clear Amulet just exists. It hurt a lot of Intimidators, though I will say I think that mons like Incineroar coming back, for example, will still find a way to be viable, considering they could always just clear the Intimidate option with Knockoff and then Parting Shot out, and that's also really strong for Incineroar. But ultimately, though, I still think that Gyarados is actually a pretty good option offensively. Clear Amulet does also benefit Gyarados a lot, as well as stuff like Life Orb and Lum. It's a great Dragonet's option. We've seen some bulky citrus sets run around as well. Apparently, Mirror Herb is even getting some usage, but I've never actually seen a team run this item on Gyarados at least. But regardless, though, I think that Gyarados is still a solid offensive mon, definitely B tier. Ditto, I can't lie, I feel like Ditto, just objectively speaking, just off of what it does alone, has to be D tier. It can't be an F tier, but I don't think Ditto's that great right now. But objectively speaking, the ability to copy just a better Pokemon, I think if nothing else, keeps it out of D tier because of the potential to be viable. Vaporeon, I've seen this run around a couple teams on VGC pace, but that's really about it. I guess this is a pretty half-decent Dozo sponge, considering you could just Haze Dozo and you have Water Absorb, and you could probably just run this thing with like a really high BizDef set and be valuable. It's also decent for a lot of potential offensive options, though I think if nothing else, at best this is a C tier option. Pretty good at, I guess, just being a good Haze option. You could also go for stuff like Yawn. I see Terra Blast on here. I don't know really why you'd want to run Terra Blast. Ultimately, though, this just feels like, I don't know, I feel like Vaporeon is just kind of an okay Pokemon. Among Eeveelutions, which I guess I'll go through and rank those now because they're all kind of going to be similar. Well, okay, let me rephrase. They're not all going to be similar, but I'll do all the Eeveelutions just to stay on Eeveelution point. Jolteon, I think, is kind of shit. This has the one set, I will say, though, that's been running around as a meme set, specifically to pop, like, the fucking Dunsparce weakness policy. So I'm going to give it D tier off of that. Just the fact that it has an actual comp that it's being run on. It's like an actual just team comp, not specifically a niche role that it does something that another mon could do better. So I guess that's a thing, but even still, it's just a really shitty support mon. Flareon's also going to be D for pretty similar reasons, though while Flareons are definitely more so offensively oriented rather than specifically with the support. It does have that one team comp running around, that really niche Trick Room team, but even still, I don't know. I still think it's kind of a niche option, but objectively speaking, Toxic Orb with Terra Normal Facade is actually pretty decent. Makes this thing have a better stab for its move pool because you're no longer just running Flare Blitz, and that's kind of decent. Facade, again, also taking advantage of Poison Heal is pretty good for it. You could throw this thing on like Trick Room. You could also give it potential for like Terra Blast for other coverage types, and that could be valuable. But ultimately, I just think this is a pretty lackluster Terramon. We have, well, let's see, for other Eeveelutions, we have Espeon up next. I can't lie, I can't think of a purpose for Espeon, though I will say, I guess looking through this, I guess Magic Bounce is kind of okay for stuff like Spore, at least to stop yourself from getting spored. Yawn is also kind of cool support, but ultimately this just feels like a worse version of Hatterene by a long mile. I'm actually putting this in F tier despite the fact that it has a little more usage than Flareon. It's really just due to speed tier, and that's really it. I think Flareon at least has a more unique role, if nothing else, right now. Umbreon is probably the best evolution. The fact that it's a dark typing, like a pure dark typing, is really strong. Snarl will always be a decent option on this. It has some cool support with stuff like obviously Moonlight keeping it healthy is pretty valuable, though ultimately the fact that recovery moves got nerfed a lot is pretty huge. I don't know, I feel like it's just a really decent option as far as support goes. And I think among all the evolutions, this is probably the best. Well, I don't know, I feel like the Haze Vaporeon actually is pretty valuable. I'm actually gonna bump it down to C. These are both probably the best support evolutions you can get. Though I will say there's an evolution we'll get into in a second that I think is a bit better. Leafeon's up next. Again, just really shitty sun option, though I will say objectively the pure grass typing is something, and you could potentially actually just go for Terra Fire on this and do the reverse of what fucking fire types do when they go for Terra Grass, because Terra Fire and Leafeon with like a pure fire typing with Chlorophyll while having Leaf Blade as a stab or even Trailblaze could be decent options. I think there's better options really for this as well. We have Glaceon. Glaceon, I think, will also be D tier. You could throw this on a Hail team, and I think that's pretty decent wherever Glaceon is. Getting to spam Blizzards is pretty cool. You have stuff like Snowcloak as well, which is pretty cool. But ultimately, again, you're just trying to use this as a Terra option, which pretty niche one at that. Though Freeze Dry is pretty decent as far as Ice typing goes. And again, you could Terra Blast into something like Fire, Steel, etc., just for a better Terra typing and go ham. But finally, though, we have the actual good evolution, like the really good evolution. Sylveon. Sylveon, I think it just gets a raw S tier. This is a really strong option this gen. You throw on Terra Fire, and this thing is an amazing option to KO Steel types. And it also handles its Steel resistance, its Steel weakness pretty well. With Hyper Voice Pixelate as well, being a way to further boost Hyper Voice damage into a stab, which is really good. It gets around stuff like random substitutes, which is valuable, especially when one of the more popular mons right now being Dondozo, typically run substitute. So that's really good for it. Yawn support is great, and typically as well, this thing can take advantage of potential quick attack, which is, in my opinion, really good for it. Overall, though, I would definitely give Sylveon a really strong S tier. Up next is Dragonite. Dragonite also, I feel like Dragonite could get an A tier. Ultimately, though, I'm kind of on the fence between A and S tier. I think I'm going to lean A tier for now. One of the biggest reasons I think is that Dragonite, while I think it's a decent option, between Inner Focus and Multiscale both being decent abilities depending on the set you're running, I think ultimately Dragonite just kind of gets outclassed by a lot of the dragons in the Terra department. For example, Hydreigon I think is an infinitely better option, considering the fact this is not only able to check Garchomp, which is still a better offensive dragon, but it's also able to just check a lot of different Pokemon in terms of the defensive aspect. And Dragonite to a degree can do this with Terra Normal. It's a decent sponge for mons like Voltengo. I think that Hydreigon ultimately is able to cause a lot more 50-50s on how Pokemon attack it. Stuff like Armouge, for example, has to play the game of will a Hydreigon Terra to beat my other mons, or will it say Unterra to beat Armouge? Dragonite doesn't really do that 50-50 with anything, I guess, besides maybe Goldengo, and I guess maybe Sylveon, which even still, again, just always clicks Hyper Voice anyway. And I think it's kind of the problem with Dragonite. All of its Terra options that really do benefit it and make it a good option kind of don't really actually force any unique prep. With stuff like Hydreigon, it does. With stuff like Garchomp, for example, it does make the difference in terms of certain attacks you would use. Maybe no longer going for a Fairy move instead of clicking a Grass move. Or maybe you can go for Terra Steel and now you're resisting Fairy outright. And I think that both those Pokemon have a lot easier time doing it. That's not to say that Dragonite can't go for Terra Steel, but then why not use Garchomp as a physical option? If you're not going for Terra Normal E-Speed, why not just use Garchomp? Or if you're going for like a Terra Fire set, for example, why not just use Hydreigon, which can go for Heat Wave and get spread off of it? So I think it's just a worse option than all those dragons. And I guess with that in mind, it's time to put Garchomp and Hydreigon also in the S tier, because again, they just take advantage of dragon type dragons that can Terra type a lot better, in my opinion. Now, I don't know where Hydreigon's... Oh, it's hiding over here. Okay, yeah. Hydreigon also gets the S tier. These two just do the job better. I think that Garchomp benefits a lot more off of Terra Ground. Their Terra Steel is also an amazing option to handle stuff like Sylveon and still play the 50-50 between Sylveon of going for a super effective option for Terra Fire or going for the super effective option because of the Terra Steel boosted hits. You get a lot of good, really strong Swords Dance sets off of this, and it benefits a lot more from Tailwinders. Really strong partner with stuff like Murkrow and Goldengo. The three of them in tandem are filthy together. Meanwhile, with Hydreigon's case, this is probably one of the best Garchomp checks you can get just in the format. It's really strong as well at adapting to a lot of common Pokemon. For example, the crit Scopeland sets with Heat Wave are amazing at getting around most Dondozo Terra types. Stuff like Steel, stealing ground, not stealing ground, stealing grass, for example. Meanwhile, as well, you go for stuff like Crit Draco, which can get around the water and Dragon sets, and you don't have to really care that your special attack is getting dropped. So I think these two are just infinitely better Terra Dragons, and that's why I wanted to mention them in this case, because I feel like they have enough similarities to Dragonite in terms of being really heavy offensive hitters for a Dragon, to where they did warrant getting mentioned here. Up next on our list, though, we'll go into some other dragons, by the way, later on. I just didn't think they were as comparable to Dragonite, so I'm waiting on them a bit. Up next, though, we do have Azumarill. Now, Azumarill, I think, is actually also a pretty decent option. Great Rain Pokemon, for example. This is a decent sponge to a lot of common to Nozo movesets, and you could go for stuff whether it's Drum or even Perish Trap with Goth. And the two extremes on Azumarill both, I think, benefited a lot. I'm going to give Azumarill the A tier. I think it's a little underexplored right now, in my opinion, considering how good it is at checking stuff. Well, never mind. I guess it's not as underexplored as I thought. It's apparently hitting 10% usage in VGC, which is a lot higher than I thought, because I've never really seen Azumarill on ladder. But I feel like it's a pretty strong option nonetheless. Azumarill is one of those bonds I think that has such fluidity to it, and it takes advantage of its typing really well, that it would kind of be impossible to not rank this thing in the A tier, in my opinion. Whether it's also, I think, even on, I will say as well, another benefit that Azu has is even on team comps with Goth, you still have to play around it as if it could either be Belly Drum or Perish Trap, even if it is most likely Perish Trap, because Goth could actually also be a strong enabler for Belly Drum with stuff like Fake Out. So I do actually think that Azumarill is, even in team comps that might look obvious, it still has the option of running both sets, which is kind of incredible for it. A lot of Pokemon kind of do need certain partners to really run certain comps. Azumarill can do both comps on both with most partners. Jumpluff, honestly, I can't lie, I do actually think this thing is legitimately not awful Pokemon. I'm gonna give this thing a C tier. I think this has merit to move up in D tier depending on what's viable. I will say I've actually seen some pretty cool options. Someone was telling me the other day they fought a weak armor Armourouge, and they banked on Jumpluff going for stuff like Tailwind plus U-turn into Armourouge with Terra Grass to activate weak armor and weakness policy. And they also use it as a Tailwind option, or stuff like Rage Powder and Sleep Powder to be really good, and Pollen Puff to heal it up, which is honestly kind of incredible. Albeit, I won't act like that there aren't better, more consistent Tailwind options or more consistent support Pokemon that you could throw on with Armourouge, but it's a pretty cool one at that. It seems like it's also being used with stuff like Gallade and Kingambit and Garchomp, which makes a lot of sense. They're just common Tailwind partners, to be honest. But overall, though, I think it's just a worse version of Murkrow, which isn't to say it's terrible. I don't think it's unusable by any means. It's actually, in my opinion, this is the best Jumpluff's ever had for support, in my opinion. But I just think it's a little outclassed is all. Sunflora, oh my god, I kind of hate that I can't put this thing in F tier, solely for the fact that I think that Sunflora actually, again, similarly, somehow I feel like Sunflora actually unironically has merit, and I'll go into this in a bit. Well, actually, no, I'm going to put it in F tier, but I will say I'm putting it towards the front of F tier. Unironically, I think this is a kind of decent Terra option on Trick Room, considering the fact that you could Terra into a type like Ground, for example, or even like Fairy. I've seen a lot of. There's unironically a couple teams that I've actually seen running like Torkoal or like different Trick Room options with Sunflora, and they're utilizing the solar power aspect. I'm actually going to get into this early in the ladder reset because I want to show this off. But there's been a couple comps that are running this, and I think that unironically, there are a lot worse options that we'll get into an F tier than Sunflora. So I'm going to put it at the front. Most of this list will not be sorted. I'm going to tell you that right now. It's just in the order that I'm talking about them. But with Sunflora specifically, I did want to acknowledge that it's borderline. Actually, no, that's all. I'm not gonna do that because it opens up a whole can of worms. We're just gonna do it in the topic I talk about them, or in the order I talk about them in, because I'm not gonna go through and sort through every low rank Pokemon, because otherwise it's gonna be a mess. It's gonna be a mess, and I don't want to set that precedent. So Sunflora is just in the F tier, but it's a kind of usable one. Murkrow gets an S tier. Not an S plus, it's an S tier. It's a strong support option, whether you're running stuff like Haze, Tailwind, Quash even. Murkrow with Quash is actually pretty good, and I'm kind of shocked we see it a little less than we do. Taunt is pretty valuable. Like, this thing gets a lot of support. It's just a really good support machine. It's probably like the best support machine we currently have, though Grim is still not bad by any means. It just, Murkrow really did take out a lot of Grim's usage, whereas if Murkrow was not legal in this format, Grim would probably be at like a 30-40% usage, in my opinion. Just, well, the fact that there's no real good Prankster Tailwind option, you'd probably just see manual Tailwind rise, and Grim would be just the Prankster Pokemon for stuff like screen support instead. But ultimately, though, I think Murkrow just existing limits any other Prankster Pokemon from being as valuable, so I'm going to give it an S tier. I guess speaking of Grim, just because of the fact I did make that analogy, I am going to still actually put this in S tier. I think it's the only Prankster Pokemon that even kind of gives Murkrow competition, but you basically do in theory, always decide, would you prefer the screens aspect of Grim, or would you prefer the Tailwind aspect of Murkrow? And there are other Tailwind options you can pair with Grim, for example, Talonflame, Kilowattrel, even Jumpluff, that I think arguably do give merit to running Grim over Murkrow. But at the same time, though, I think that Murkrow's support is just a lot more merited towards a lot of the common options. For example, the Dozer currently has like 25% usage, and having the Prankster Haze option over like a Prankster Taunt or Screens, I think is more valuable for Dondozo. We have stuff like Tailwind on Murkrow, which on just the single Pokemon versus having to split it with the Prankster Screens option and a fast Tailwinder on Grimm's comps is just more valuable when partnering with stuff like Hydreigon, Garchomp, it's Goldango, etc. So I do think that Murkrow benefits the meta slightly more, though Grim is still objectively speaking just a good Prankster option. Next was Slowking. Someone had actually asked in my comments how to make Slowking, or maybe it was Slowbro viable, I forget which, but I think they're both actually almost viable options with Oblivious or Regen. You can realistically get off Trick Rooms pretty easy, and in Slowking's case, you're actually a decent pivot. I think Slowking's a little underexplored personally. I'm going to give Slowking the D tier, but I am giving Slowbro F tier. I think Slowbro objectively just has no reason to really run over Slowking unless if you're really looking for a Vizdev option. And I think Slowking, if nothing else, having the momentum out into a better Pokemon is something in its favor. So with Chilly Reception in its moveset, we'll give Slowking D tier and Slowbro F tier. Next up is Scizor. Scizor is pretty decent offensively, albeit I think this is one of those things where I feel like Scizor just kind of gets outclassed as far as an offensive priority Terra option goes. Whether you're running stuff like Bullet Punch or Quick Attack for the Terra typing of Steel or Normal, you have other options as well, like U-Turn for just good momentum. Close Combat's great for breaking a lot of mons in general as a high damage option. But I'm gonna give Scizor the C tier. I don't think it's that great right now, but ultimately a Steel type in general with only a Fire weakness is pretty valuable. But yeah, sadly I just don't think this is Scizor's meta. But it's still objectively a strong Pokemon in my opinion. Next up is Ursaring. Weirdly enough, I don't think that Ursaring is exactly too invaluable. This is one of those things where I think Ursaring, weirdly enough, could actually work as an Violet option for Trick Room teams. I'm going to give it D tier. The Guts ability as well does open up a lot as far as running Flame Orb, because Ursaring's stat line isn't even that bad as far as running Trick Room goes, and throwing us on with Protect actually is valuable for Trick Room, because similar to how Hariyama is really good right now with the Detect Flame Orb sets, you could utilize this to guarantee that one of your Trick Room options will be completely immune to Amoonguss Spore. So I think that running Flame Orb on this also isn't a bad option, but I think objectively speaking, Ursaring is a really viable option. This will probably lower to F tier when Ursaluna is introduced to the format, but for right now at least, I think it has some actual merit. D tier. Chia we're gonna ignore, so next up on the list is Espathra. Espathra I think is kind of cool. I will say I saw Wolfie actually discussing Espathra recently, and I do agree that actually I don't think that Opportunist is the good ability. I think that Speed Boost is the reason you would run this mon, running it as some sort of support option, or even just running it with redirection from stuff like Amoonguss, and going for Calm Mindsets with Lumina Clash and Gleam, and then potentially at that fourth slot either going with Protect or even a Terra Blast option potentially for something like Terra Fighting could be cool for certain matchups. I do think this mon is a little underexplored. I'm kind of shocked we haven't seen more Espathra. I do actually think it's a pretty valuable cleaner though, and we're going to throw it in this C tier. Flamigo, I'll be honest, I think Flamigo is very much a one-trick pony. It's one of those things that I think popped off really well early ladder, and I think it's going to be something that will do work in like the really low ladder settings, but I don't think it's something that will ever have really high level play personally. Maybe I'm wrong in that, but I think as the meta settles and people realize what Flamigo does, it's a mon that I think objectively speaking will not actually see high level play consistently. It's really one of those things that you run because you want to get thumbnail mon because, oh my god, Flamigo did this really cool trick that you're not using right now. I'm not using it right now because I think there's a lot better options as far as support goes. Co-Star is really the only actual thing that keeps it out of D tier. I'm going to put it in C, but this is a really gimmicky C tier at best. Rabska actually do think is decent. We're going to give Rabska, and this might be a bit of a hot take, I'm going to give Rabska C tier. I think it's a pretty cool Revival Blessing option for Trick Room, and I will say I think that we're going to start to see in this second half of the format a rise in Rabska usage. This is going to be my hot take of the video. I think we'll see a hot rise in Rabska Trick Room. We actually saw a pretty high showing in one of the Limitless tournaments that was the Beanie Brawl Rumble, but we actually saw a pretty decent showing of Rabska, considering that if I remember correctly, yeah, Rabska actually ranked 3rd overall in this tournament with an 8-1 setting, which is honestly pretty incredible. I'm pretty sure that means it made like semifinals or something like that. But Rabsca, Trick Room with like Fergraph, Hariyama, Rabsca, Amoonguss, Mousehold, Annihilate ranked 3rd overall, which really does say a lot. I do think this one, genuinely speaking, is actually kind of viable. Actually, no, I'm not gonna put it in C. I'm gonna put this in B. Again, might be the hot take of the video, similar to how I put Garganacl in like my PU predictions in the singles tier list way back pre-meta, and that aged really badly. Maybe this Rabsca one does too, but I genuinely do think we're gonna start to see more Rabsca rising. This is a mon that I think in general benefits Trick Room a lot, and I think people are catching on in doubles at least that Revival Blessing can be really good in these 4v4 scenarios to lead off with a really good breaker, play it really aggressively, and then bring it back when your opponent's team is so weak and they can't handle it. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong, and Rabsca's just gonna be shit. Who fucking knows? Regardless, though, I did feel pretty passionate on that C tier. Next was Pelipper, and I actually think that Pelipper Rain is going to be B tier. This will definitely rise to an S tier when Basculegion is around, and I'm actually going to have a mini vid going up on Friday regarding that. But I do think, objectively speaking, though, that Pelipper will be a really strong option when Basculegion comes in. For now, though, we don't have Basculegion. It's just Basculegion at home, which is like, what, Palafin or like Floatzel, Dreadnought, not Meowscarada, Quaquaval, etc. There's all these different offensive water types, which Rain is kind of in like the weirdest position it's ever been in. Right now, Rain doesn't really have that like definitive, I am running this Pokemon to run with Rain. It doesn't. It has a lot of different really bad, well, not bad, but like kind of niche options that Rain does make them viable. And I think that Pelipper does have a lot of good support for Rain though, with stuff like Helping Hand and Tailwind to give an edge over other weathers, especially if they do change the weather on you, which is pretty cool. You don't really get that with stuff like Torkoal. You kind of need the other support Pokemon to do it in terms of setting Trick Room to get that advantage, or with stuff like Dragon on Tyranitar, we need to run Dragon Dance to get that for like the single target. But Pelipper just sets it on its own, so you can compress that support role into one Pokemon, which I think is actually pretty cool. B tier. Next up is Masquerain, kind of a shit Intimidator. Masquerain, I don't really think it's ever going to get usage, but definitely F tier. Really the best thing I guess this thing gets is like Tailwind plus Struggle Bug with Intimidate, which is something, but there's better options. Breloom solid, easy A tier, really strong with loaded dice in my opinion. Also a really good faster Spore option, albeit Mungus is objectively better as a Spore mon, but Breloom does have a lot of merit on Tailwind teams, for example, and also Bullet Seed and Mach Punch are both just really strong sabs. Sableye, pretty decent Quash mon, but objectively speaking Murkrow's better. We're gonna give this thing like a B tier. It's definitely better than something like Grafia as far as Prankster goes, and I think that Sableye actually does have like some legitimate merit. But ultimately speaking, Murkrow just does a lot of the same roles better, though it can, I guess, compress the fact that it can run Quash while also running Screen, so it's like a baby child of Grim and Murkrow, just worse at both their roles, really. It's just worse at both their roles. This is literally like the child of Murkrow Grim. Camerupt, F tier, not even gonna get into this one, it's just really bad. For a lot of the F tiers, by the way, if I don't really have a lot to say, I'm just gonna start skimming over them because we're already at like 27 minutes and I have a lot more Pokemon to go over. Torkoal up next. Torkoal is an easy S tier, albeit I think this is probably one of the worst Torkoal metas we've ever had, but Torkoal is still pretty decent. We're seeing a lot of wide guard options rise with stuff like Hariyama and Armors running wide guard specifically to handle Torkoal matchups. I think that's pretty decent for it, just how much of an influence it has, but it's still a really hard, obnoxious Pokemon to handle in Trick Room. And when you pair this with stuff like Oranguru, you could just instruct spam Eruption and just ruin teams. And we're also seeing a lot of Oranguru comps as well running, as I said, the Hariyamas, which they're not only running wide guard for Torkoal, but they're also running fake out to enable it. So I do think it speaks a lot on how good Torkoal is, considering it has some really strong team comps that can not only handle opposing Torkoal mirrors, but they can also then enable your own Torkoal. So easy S tier. Grumpig, F tier. Bennet, F tier. Mence, on the other hand, this is an A tier. I think of Mence is, well, actually no, I'm gonna give Mence a B tier. This is one of those really strong Intimidate options I was talking about that we get into later, and one of those strong dragons that we get into later. Albeit, I think that Mence of the pseudo dragons is probably one of the worst in this format. That's not to say it's unviable. I think that Mence realistically having stuff like Tailwind with, whether it's physical on stuff like Dueling Beat and Dragonclaw sets, or special with stuff like Hurricane and Draco is pretty valuable. You can go with stuff like Terra Fire as well with Heatwave Spread, which is pretty good for it. Mence, again, also having potential for Moxie is kind of cool, but really Intimidate is where it's at. This is a definite pretty decent manual Tailwind option solely for the fact that it's a lot bulkier than stuff like Talonflame and also the Kilowattrel, which, while Talonflame does, to be fair, have the Prankster, well, the priority Tailwind on the first turn, if you get Fake Outed first, you're kind of screwed in the priority aspect. And I think that Mence having actual bulk to its name does help it a lot in terms of giving it an actual reason to run it over Prankster options like Murkrow. So I'll give Mence that. I think it's actually a decent option, and I'm kind of shocked to see that we have not seen more Mence Rain. I feel like Mence Rain is going to be a pretty cool meta call, but maybe I'm just overhyping Mence Rain. I feel like with Hurricane, though, it's a pretty cool option. Staraptor's kind of okay. D tier for sure. One thing that I will give Staraptor is the fact that this thing, if I remember correctly, it does have, Final Gambit plus Intimidate, which is kind of cool, and it's a little bit faster than Annihilate as a Scarfer, which, again, kind of cool, but ultimately I feel like this is just way too gimmicky for Mon, and it's just trying, well, actually no, that's a lie. I'm gonna give it C tier. If I can give Flamigo C tier, I can give Raptor C tier. But I feel like this is kind of a really cool roll compression option, if nothing else, between stuff like, for example, Mence or Annihilate, and it's really just meant to try and compress it all into one roll. It just doesn't do it that great. Kricketune, F tier. Pachirisu, I think is a C tier. This I think could be argued for a D tier, but I think Pachirisu still has a lot of good support that, in my opinion, is a little underexplored this format. It keeps a lot of the same stuff that made Pachirisu always viable, and you can pair this with stuff like Talonflame, Gyarados, Garchomp, etc. You know, the usual offenders. But Pachirisu, I think, still has some actual merit. Super Fang will always just be a really good way at breaking past stuff that Pachi can't because it's so weak offensively. You got stuff like Follow Me, and it is one of the only Follow Me options. However, Indeedee and Maushold are just objectively better options for this. Ultimately, though, Pachirisu is pretty cool. I think it does have a lot of merit. We'll just have to see where it goes in this format. Gastrodon's probably a B tier. In my opinion, this is probably the worst format Gastrodon has ever had as far as viability goes, but it's not to say it's unviable. You get stuff like Clear Smog, which is great for Dozo Mirrors, though ultimately when a lot of Pokemon can just throw Terra Blast on to get out of this bad Gastrodon matchup, it hurts a lot of Stormjay merit here, in my opinion. Also, without Rain being as mainstay of an option as it has been in certain seasons previously, considering, again, you're running Rain with like Palafin or with like Quackavolt or Floatzel, it's not the same, even if those mons are all pseudo viable. But Gastrodon, I think, just has a lot of hurt against it, though it's not to say it's a bad Pokemon. I just think that a lot is going against it right now. This will, again, be a lot more of a viable option, especially with like a potential Terra Normal Stormjay set when Basculegion comes out, and I think this will actually rise to like the A tier or maybe even S tier when that comes, because this is probably one of the better checks you could actually run for Basculegion when that time comes. But for now, though, Rain isn't really a threat, so why run Gastrodon? B tier. Mismagius is kind of cool, I guess. Has some cool Terra options to get around potential random shit. I'm gonna give this like a C tier. This has some cool support, but it's really just pseudo Gengar. It's just shitty Gengar, which I guess on the Gengar note, I'm gonna put Gengar in the A tier, actually. I think Gengar is a pretty cool support option right now. Realistically, Gengar does offer a lot. You get stuff like Haze and Icy Wind. Haze can get around random Dozo Mirrors, and also Icy Wind is great for speed control, manually speaking, and it doesn't rely as much on Tailwind, which is pretty cool. Gengar also has the merit of being a really good fairy killer. You get stuff like Shadow Ball. You could run Terra as well to get around random checks like Dark types, for example, with King Gambit, and Terra fighting with Terra Blast would be a strong way around that without risking Focus Blast accuracy. Overall, Gengar is just kind of an awkward mon. I think it's a decent enough support option to put it in A tier, but it's going to be one of the weaker A's for sure. Honchkrow is definitely an F tier. I cannot see a reason to run this. Lucario, I'm going to give Lucario C tier solely because of stuff like beat up strategies. I've actually seen random team comps to this. Actually, no, I'm gonna give it D tier. I've seen random niche stuff with like beat up into Justified work with this mon, and you throw on like E-Speed and Terra Normal priority or like Close Combat or Meteor Mash and go for one of the stab options, but that's really about it. Objectively speaking, this is just a really, really gimmicky mon, and it's just trying to recreate Terrakion, but it's doing it a lot worse in my opinion, especially with Psy Spam being so good to get around the E-Speed stuff. It's just D tier at best. Hippo is actually kind of cool. Hippo, I'm gonna give C tier. If nothing else, I think it does have a little bit of merit over Tyranitar, specifically in the fact that it's a pretty decent Garchomp check, which Tyranitar can't really do. And the reason I do mention this is because of the fact that when you would consider the fact the best Sand Sweeper is Lycanroc does have a lot of issues with Garchomp. So being a good sponge for this mon is actually pretty valuable, considering you could do stuff like Ice Fang or even just helping hand support a player off for Lycanroc, which is pretty valuable. So I'm gonna give Hippo C tier. If nothing else, I think it has actual merit, but I don't think it's the best Sand Setter. I think objectively as T-Tar. Which I guess on the Tyranitar note, Tyranitar is going to get a solid A tier. I think among the weathers, this is definitely one of the weaker ones, though I will say I think that objectively Rain is the weakest currently, despite having the most options. But Tyranitar Sand, if nothing else, does have some merit in the sense that Lycanroc is a pretty good Endeavor option, and just being able to go with Focus Sash can be strong at weakening random opponents, and also Rock Slide Flinch on such a fast Pokemon, objectively speaking, will never be bad. Tyranitar is also a pretty decent Terra option. We've seen Terra Flying on the rise a lot to get around that fighting weakness, So yeah, I do think a Tyranitar objectively is a pretty good Pokemon. You could maybe make an argument for S, but I think that Torkoal is a lot more consistent of a weather. Meanwhile, as well, I think that Hail also gives us a lot of competition for the second best weather spot, but I'll get into Hail in a little bit. We're actually almost at Hail anyway. Toxicroak's up next. I can't really think of a reason to run Toxicroak in this format. Similarly to Gastrodon, it's just not a good format for immunities, and Rain's not really that good right now, which would be the reason to run Croak. Definite F tier. Lumineon F. Gallade though. Gallade's a really attractive A tier option right now. Oh my god, this is... If you told me that regular Gallade would have been like the sleeper pick of returning Mons in Scarlet and Violet, I would have laughed. But this thing is actually really good. You can run this thing with like Scope Lens sets and go for crits with Psycho Cut and Leaf Blade, and with the Sharpness ability, you're boosting any sort of like cutting option by 1.5. So it's basically Tough Claws for cutting moves, which is insanity. It's a great Trick Room option. It's a great Tailwind option. This is one of the best offensive ways to get around Dondozo in the format, considering you have Sacred Sword, which is great for Terra Steel sets. Psycho Cut is great for any sort of Terra Dragon set or maybe like a Terra Grass set. And meanwhile, Leaf Blade is great for stuff like Terra Water or even just base Dondozo. Especially with the Scope Lens, you're able to high crit those stats and get around the defense boost completely. But between the Stabs and Leaf Blade, you're able to get around pretty much any common Dondozo Terra type. And that's a lot, considering even Meowscarada does have trouble with certain Terra routes. So ultimately, easy A tier. I think you could even make a case for S on this one, but I'm going to personally be a little more conservative because I do think that Gallade is not without its faults. Its AV speed is a little average at best, though it has a lot of merit in Tailwind, and it's also a little too fast for Trick Room, but again, has a lot of merit if you're playing a really fast comp. So we'll give it A tier. Frostlass is kind of shit, but if nothing else, I mean, I guess Icy Wind is a thing you could do on this, but I'm still giving it an F tier. I think there's a lot of better options for Ice types this gen, and there's a lot better Icy Winders. I'm gonna give it F tier. If I can give it to Espeon, I'll give it to this. Rotom Heat's pretty decent as far as Rotom forms go. You could potentially go for Terra on this. And we'll actually just do all the Rotoms right now. Rotom Wash is objectively the best. We'll put this in A tier. I'm gonna give Heat B tier. Heat is really good for Amoonguss matchups without having to go for Terastal. Rotom Wash kind of does have to for that matchup, but even still, it's not a bad option. Rotom Mow, we're gonna have C tier. This is cool on Rain, but that's really the only thing I can think of merit on this one being. Rotom Fan gets an F tier. I think this one's just objectively shit now. We're gonna give regular Rotom as well an F tier, because why bother running regular Rotom when I can run a stat boosted Rotom? Wherever Rotom hid, it's hiding enough for me to not see it right now on this tier list. I don't know where the fuck regular Rotom is hiding. I'm sure someone's already commented that I have been pretty blind with this one, which to that I will say I need an eye exam anyway. But I can't find regular Rotom, so I guess it gets a pass right now. I'm gonna pause the vid actually really quickly just to find this. So really quickly, I guess the reason why I could not find those mons was because Rotom Frost and base Rotom are both actually missing from this. So pretend Rotom Frost is like a D tier, just because of a couple of random comps that have been popularized, and pretend regular Rotom is an F tier. But that's really the Rotoms right there. Rotom Wash is definitely really good at, though, again, being a nice Terra option around stuff like Amoonguss with Terra Fire. Really incredible just being a pseudo Rotom Heat while still having Pump. Rotom Heat could basically do the inverse, or you could just go for Terra Electric, which is pretty decent. Just in general, Rotom Heat's a pretty decent option, again, not having to worry about Amoonguss matchups because it just beats them pretty easily, naturally, without Terra, which is kind of cool. It's like the one Rotom that doesn't really need to super rely on Terra. Rotom Mow is just kind of awkward. I feel like it's just a worse version of both, but it has cool options like Natural Stab for Gastrodon. That's really about it. And the rest are just kind of whatever. Lilligant's decent. Really good Torkoal partner, though I think I will say, and I've personally noticed this, I don't know if anyone in the comments has, but I've noticed that Lilligant is actually a lot harder to run in this format than usual. Actually, I'm going to bump Lilligant down to B. I feel like it's a mon that fits well in a comp, but I feel like I'm never actually bringing Lilligant. It's just on here specifically to threaten. My team is not just a Trick Room team. I have Lilligant, and then I bench it like 5 to 6 games. But ultimately, though, Lilligant's still a pretty decent support mon for Torkoal. After You will never be a bad option in this, and I think objectively speaking, among Torkoal supports, besides something like a Trick Room option being just mandatory, even though there's a lot of Trick Room options, Lilligant will always just be a valuable support. This will probably drop to D tier, though, when Hisuian Lilligant comes in the field, because, oh baby, that is a free A tier. That is a free A tier when that does get introduced, but we'll get into that when the next home mons come out. Basculin's an F tier. Crook, I'm going to give Crook C tier. I feel like among the Intimidate options, Crook is definitely a lot weaker, though Crook is not without its strengths. I think it's a pretty decent Assault Vest sponge, and you could potentially use this as a good Terra option around Armourouge, but that's kind of where it ends. Snarl, I guess, is good support. You get stuff like Gong Shot, which is cool for Sylveon, but like, I don't know. I think Amon just kind of shit this gen. Just one of the weaker support Intimidate Mons for sure. Easy C tier. Zoroark is just definitely an F tier. I don't know why you'd run Zoroark this gen. I'll be honest. If someone wants to prove me wrong in the comments, love to see your Zoroark team comp. But let me know your ladder rating as well when we get. I'm so sorry. That was way too unwarranted. I'm not that good at VGC anyway. I won't act like I have the merit to call out someone's ladder rating. I'm so sorry. But anyway, I don't think Zoroark's that good this gen at all. I could not tell you a reason to run Zoroark. Maybe with Goth, I guess, but that's really about it. But speaking of Goth, though, Goth's actually kind of cool. I'm giving Goth B tier. I think Goth is in one of those surges where it's actually viable again in VGC. Unlike last gen where Dynamax was able to get around it pretty easily, Goth is seeing a pretty good high right now running off Terrastal, and it benefits a lot from Terrastal with stuff like Ghost, for example, to get around fake outs. You could run this with Shadow Tag, and you're a pretty good sponge. I will say, though, it's not without its faults. Going for any sort of Terra Ghost Shadow Tag is a pretty easy way to get around Goth without having to run Shed Shell, which is pretty bad for Goth. There's a lot of merit to run Terra Ghost actually because it's a great immunity to fake out, and it also again gets around Goth, and it's also just a really good Terra typing. Even just as an offensive way, it's a good Terra typing. So I think that Goth, if nothing else, is hurt by that. But it's a pretty good Trick Room option, great Hypnosis spammer. It has some merit with screens and Helping Hand, I get. Well, not screens. You're not really running screens. You're running like Heal Pulse though and Helping Hand, which is good. Great for foul playing physical attackers. Goth definitely though is a pretty strong option. Easy B tier. Sawsbuck, Shipmon. Amoonguss is a strong S tier. This is a great redirection option for VGC for sure. I tried to type in strong and Dreadnought came up, so I guess that's a thing. But Amoonguss though, Amoonguss is great at running Rocky Helmet this gen. It's a great Terra Water option too, which helps you get around stuff like Torkoal, for example. Really clear cut how you're running it. You're basically running Spore, Rage Powder, Pollen Puff, Clear Smog almost every game with, I guess, merit for Giga Drain. Apparently Leaf Storm's being ran, I don't know why. And then I guess Protect is being ran. I personally think it's garbage in Amoonguss, but you do you. Overall though, this is a really free redirection Pokemon. It is probably the best one in my opinion in this format. Just I don't think any of the redirections are S+ personally. Especially when the fact that the best Pokemon right now is Meowscarada, and it's not really clicking Terra, and if it is, I guess it's clicking Grass, but you typically want to keep the dual type on that. And the fact that it's completely immune to redirection, it hurts its case a lot for Amoonguss. Also, Safety Goggles is a pretty free ran, and it's a pretty common option to get around Rage Powder 2. Terra Grass is great, and again, it's a fairly decent Terra type in a lot of Pokemon, so there's a decent amount of ways. This is definitely still a strong option though, despite all that, but definitely hurts a lot. Also, Clear Smog is valuable for most Dozo matchups, though again, Terra Steel, again, hurts the merit a lot for this. Aloe, kind of shit. Eel, kind of shit. Haxorus, though, we'll give it D tier. If nothing else, I think this is a strong offensive nuke. You could potentially run this on Tailwind, I guess, and be valuable. And the attack is strong enough. Plus, Breaking Swipe is such a good move for a nice spread option, and it's a good attack dropper that I guess Haxorus has merit, because not even Dragapult kept this move, and I'm fucking annoyed by that. We'll get into Dragapult, though, in a bit. I don't like that it lost this move. It hurts a lot of Dragapult merit. Beartic. Beartic is okay, I guess. If nothing else, I guess the fact that it got stuff like Close Combat is pretty decent, or whatever boost I got. I know I got a couple decent offensive moves. I guess it's kind of cool as a Hail Sweeper or a Rain Sweeper, but it's just kind of niche. D tier. Craganole's really shit. I can't imagine a reason you'd want to run this mon. Craganole's 1.15%, 1.51% usage. What the fuck? Why are people running this mon? I feel like this is shit. I guess the support is okay. Why are people running this mon? I guess maybe Terra Steel. You know, I guess Levitate with Speed Control plus Terra typing. I guess, you know what? Maybe I'm underselling this. I'm gonna give this thing a D tier, despite the high usage compared to everything else in this tier. Because most of these mons are like under 0.5% usage. I'm still giving this a D tier. I think objectively this is just a really weird mon to run on teams, and I feel like objectively for what it does, there's a lot of better options. Though I can't deny that having like a 1 or 2 weakness mon, if that with Levitate, is bad. I don't know. I still think his mon isn't good, but I'm not going to deny the fact that the support, I guess, is kind of cool, and you could run Haze for Dozo, which is kind of cool. I've talked myself into putting this in D. It's I guess a strong option for D, but like, oh my god, I don't think this is that good though. Braviary, I don't know. I don't think this is that good. I think realistically, Defiant doesn't really matter when a lot of Intimidators are kind of whatever right now. This will go up and probably to like the D tier when Incineroar and Landorus do eventually come back, but for now it's an F tier. Volcarona, really strong option, great Terra option as well. Really cool Rage Powder option, but typically this is running like Quiver Dance with Terra Water, or maybe like a Terra Grass or something like that. Basically just some sort of defensive option. You're going with moves like Struggle Bug or Bug Buzz with like Heat Wave as a primary attack here. Decent Pokemon overall, really good bulky Quiver option. Probably one of the better formats that Volcus had, especially when it's just such a free special setup option. And it's probably, in my opinion, one of the better special setup mons you could run. Albeit, Sylveon, I guess, can run Calm Mind, but it's typically not running it. Armrouge can, if you count weakness policy as setup, I guess Armrouge would be the best. But I think ultimately for a flat-out setup option, Volcarona is probably the best you get as far as a consistent Quiver Dance mon, or just a consistent setup mon. Easy A tier. I think you can make a case for S though. Talonflame gets an A tier. Pretty cool with Gale Wings as far as a priority option goes. And especially when you compare this with Grimmsnarl, it's one of the biggest reasons to justify running Grim over Murkrow in my opinion, because of the still priority you get on Tailwind. But ultimately speaking, I feel like a Talonflame is just so heavily outclassed by Murkrow, despite the fact that it makes a Grim so good. I can't justify putting this in S tier, because yeah, I mean the support with like Will-O-Wisp is decent, and yeah, you do get some options to handle steals, and an actual offensive presence, which Murkrow can't really do, and yeah, you get stuff like Quick Guard for support and Taunt, which is great for other stuff, especially when it's not priority and you can actually get around potential Prankster mons. But I still think Murkrow just so heavily outclasses that I can't justify the S tier, even though I think it's a good mon. Talonflame's a great mon. Vivillon's a B tier. I will say that my prediction about this being the best Friend Guard option is actually really off the mark here. Considering the fact, well, actually no, I'm gonna give this thing C tier, because you're not even really able to run this thing as a Friend Guard option. You're kind of resorting to run this as like a gimmick set with Sleep Powder, which, not to say that it's bad, actually, I have a vid going up later this week on that. I think it's kind of decent. I can run this thing with like Hurricane and Sleep Powder and just kind of massacre teams, because it's one of those things where in an unrestricted sleep format, objectively this will always have merit. And Friend Guard is kind of an okay option too, to just, I guess, bank around the fact that people aren't predicting that. I still think this thing offers a more wider variety of team comps than Cryogonal does, so I'm gonna give it the C tier. But ultimately though, this has a lot of redirection. It just, again, similarly to stuff like Jump Bluff, it's just outclassed by Volcarona. But I don't know, maybe this is just Vivillon bias. I think it's an actually decent Pokemon though. Pyro is an F tier. Florges is kind of cool. I think Symbiosis with Citrus stats is at least something. I will say though, I think, and I've been talking about this with a few other people as far as VGC goes, but I think that objectively Florges will actually be kind of a cool option as far as when the Paradox Pokemon come out, because you could throw this next to a Paradox Pokemon with Booster Energy and then pass them an actual item and really take advantage of all of those free Booster Energy sweepers that way. So I will say, I think this will actually get a lot of more usage when stuff like Roaring Moon comes out, for example. But for now, I'm going to put this in D tier. I don't think it has a lot of options that can consistently really take advantage of Florges' ability. But I will say with Booster Energy, that will be good. You can still, I guess, take advantage of this with stuff like potentially Indeedee, but I don't know if you really want to justify leading this next to another support Pokemon. So for now, when there's no offensive ways to take advantage of the Symbiosis, we're going to give it D tier. Go-Go's shit. Dragalge I think is okay. If nothing else, I think this has some cool Trick Room merit, but we'll give it D tier. I guess it's a Trick Room option that does get Haze, which is kind of cool, but I feel like this is in every way would probably just benefit best from running like similar to Hydreigon, like a Terra Scope Lens set, and just trying to spam Draco and maybe get rid of its ground weakness. But I don't know, I don't think it's a great mon right now. Objectively speaking, it's just a kind of cool Trick Room option that's bulky with adaptability and good stabs, and that's about where the strengths end. Clawitzer, I can't really think of a reason to actually run this mon in my opinion. Definite F tier. Hawlucha, this is probably one of the better formats for Hawlucha. Well, actually, no. That's a lie. I feel like there's a lot to get around Terra Hawlucha, and there's a lot better speed control options. I'm going to give this thing like a D tier solely for Unburden and the fact that Indeedee is so fucking good right now. And that's really it. Goodra, I don't know. I feel like Goodra's also kind of a shit mon right now. We're going to give Goodra the D tier. If nothing else, I think it's a cool Terra candidate, and it has a really wide coverage pool, and you can kind of just show this thing with Assault Vest and go with like a Terra Steel set and be a decent defensive tank. But at the same time, though, the meta is so physically leaning right now, this doesn't really matter. So we'll give it D tier just off of, I guess, the potential to be viable, which is something. Klefki, I don't know. I feel like Klefki's kind of shit too right now, to be honest. It's just outclassed by a lot of the other supports, though objectively speaking, it offers enough to, I guess, keep it in the D tier. Avalugg is just really shit. Avalugg, there's no reason to run this. There's 1.38. Oh, you know what? Yeah, Wide Guard. I guess Wide Guard's actually kind of a decent reason, and it's a pretty cool Trick Room option. I guess no tempo as well is kind of cool for Intimidate, but ultimately, yeah, sturdy. You know, I can actually see the merit on this one. I can kind of see it. Unlike Cryogonal, I can kind of see why you'd use this. I'm giving this D tier too. I think it's just better Cryogonal. Actually, no, I'm going to put this in C tier. I think it's, again, just better octagonal. You could potentially go with like a Terra Fighting set, and that would actually be pretty cool in Trick Room. And again, Wide Guard support is actually pretty valuable, especially with the Armories raising so high. You could maybe also go with like Terra Dark, I guess, or like a Terra Water, and just, again, go for the better defensive typing. And Ice Spinner removing terrain has some actual merit here. Now we're talking about a Pokemon that I will actually take back all of my criticism on. I think this is actually kind of cool, and I've talked myself into it looking at the Pikalytics stats. This seems kind of fun. I want to kind of run it now, I'll be honest. Expect an Avalok vid soon, I guess. Noivern's a cool manual Tailwinder. It's pretty fast, but I think ultimately it's just kind of outclassed by Kilowattrel. We'll give it D tier. Gumshoes is F. Crab, I'm gonna give D. I think if nothing else, Crab does have some merit as far as a Trick Room breaker. You could probably run this like Terra Water and just steal the Kofu strat, trying to boost Crab Hammer. And again, similarly, it does get Wide Guard. I just think it's objectively speaking outclassed by Hariyama here. Which I guess, speaking of Hariyama, I don't know how we haven't covered it yet, but out of order, I guess. Hariyama is definitely going to go in the A tier. This is probably just one of the best Wide Guard options you can get into, and I guess I've talked about a few of them already, but Hariyama is objectively the best one. You could maybe make a case for S tier, but I think it's a little too soon to call it S tier in my opinion, because I feel like it's one of those things that's going to be just a meta trend, and it will quickly die out, or at least become a little less viable. But you could pair this with a lot of good Trick Room options, stuff like Oranguru, Ferrograph, etc., and get pretty free Trick Room options. And with Terra Dark as well, you can get around different size spam options like the Armorouge, or you can maybe go with like some other defensive typing. For example, I could totally see merit in like a defensive Terra Water set or Terra Rock, which Terra Rock would be good on Rock Slide variants of Hariyama, and you could throw on Wide Guard, because you could either boost the damage with Wide Guard potentially. You could either A, take hits from Expanding Force with Wide Guard, or B, boost the damage with Rock Sled, and both of those have merit. But you have a lot of different routes. I've even seen Terra Normal, which I will say in my last stream when I was doing for a tour run, I did this Terra Normal, but I actually think it has a little bit more merit than I thought for boosting Facade. There's a lot of different Terra options I think that are kind of cool, and a lot of them are unexplored, but Dark is still probably one of the best you could throw on this, objectively an A tier mon. Up next, Oricorio. So are all the Oricorios here? It does not look like they are. I think it's just Palm, which is honestly fine, because this is probably one of, well, I don't know, I think they're all kind of similar actually. They're all pseudo viable. They're all C tier mons in my opinion. Getting Quiver Dance on its own is actually kind of cool, and the fact that you could pair this with Volcarona is actually kind of viable. It's kind of cool. Actually, no, I can't. I take it back. This is actually just a really big gimmick mon. But objectively speaking, I think this is a decent enough gimmick mon. It gets stuff like Taunt and Icy Wind for cool supports too. It's just a really good support mon. I can't really see which Oricorio I would say is confidently the best. I think it's probably, in my opinion, Tentu or Palm, but I'm not too sure. Regardless though, it's definitely a D tier gimmick mon for sure. Lycanroc Dusk is unviable. I don't know why you would run this. I also think that in a similar note, that Lycanroc Midnight is unviable. It's even worse. Lycanroc Day, though, is a solid B tier option. This makes Tyranitar as a sand option work more viably, though Tyranitar is still a good mon on its own right. But typically, though, you would just run this thing with Tyranitar or Hippowdon, and honestly, you can get a lot of merit out of flinching teams with this. It's pretty good at taking out a lot of mons that would maybe handle potential Terra Grassdendozers, for example, so you could pair this with that. Though really, Lycanroc just being one of the fastest flinch machines in the game objectively makes it viable. Easy B tier. We're gonna go into Pex now. Toxapex, weirdly enough, I'm only gonna give this thing actual rating because of Wide Guard and the fact that it's kind of bulky, and also the fact that it's Haze. It's a really weird Dozo check. I'm actually gonna give it C tier off of that. I think it has enough going for it as far as the support move pool goes, to where I could actually see this thing being somewhat viable, but it's still pretty just whatever. C tier. Mudstale's pretty cool, great Trick Room option. I'm giving this thing A tier in my opinion, probably one of the best grounds you could run for Trick Room, and it's really just the Trick Room equivalent of, actually, I don't know if I feel like that Garchomp. I'm gonna give this thing B tier actually. I feel like, again, this is the Trick Room equivalent to Garchomp, though I will say a lot of Trick Room also doesn't really need ground types right now. This will definitely go down in rating significantly when Ursaluna is introduced, though. I think Ursaluna will objectively outclass it, and it will make Trick Room, like a hard Trick Room comp, more viable. But a lot of Trick Room right now isn't running hard Trick Room, so I think I'm gonna give it a B tier. It's still a good mon in my opinion, and you can still take advantage of stuff like AV sets or Bandit sets pretty well. And with Terra, whether it's fighting, or maybe you could also go with like Terra Water or Terra Ground and just boost high horsepower moves, I think it has some merit. Just, I don't know. Lurantis, I'm gonna give this a D if nothing else for Contrary. Contrary, I think objectively keeps us out of the F tier, considering you could run this like Contrary with Terra Water or something and be viable, or like Terra Fire and hit different grasses. It's a cool Trick Room option in my opinion, but I don't know. I don't think it's great. Salazzle, Salazzle again gets D tier if nothing else. It's a kind of fast fake out mon on what the fuck? Why is Salazzle gonna use? Well, I guess Oblivious. Oblivious for potential for like taunt and shit is kind of cool. I don't know. I'm actually gonna give it the C tier. I think the fast manual taunt is actually pretty valuable if nothing else. It's a good fairy killer. It gets fake out on its own, which is good. And you can run it with Sash Endeavor. Yeah, I'll give it this. I think it's just a worse Sash Endeavor mon than Lycanroc though, which has a lot faster of a route to go, and it basically does mandate priority, whereas Salazzle has actual meta options even outside of Scarfers that outpace it. So yeah, we'll give Salazzle C tier. Serena gets a solid B tier. Being able to block priority is pretty cool, but I think that it has a lot of competition this gen with stuff like Farigiraf being at least a more viable option. Actually, no, I'm gonna give it C tier off of that, because Farigiraf is definitely a more viable option. And I guess while we're talking about Farigiraf, let's get into Farigiraf, because I do think that Farigiraf is also, again, just a better version of this. Farigiraf is able to set up Trick Room, which I think that alone does warrant it over Serena, though Serena is pretty bulky, and the pure grass typing has some merits. Stuff like U-Turn and Chop Kick are pretty valuable in this, but ultimately, I think that Farigiraf just being a Trick Room setter, if nothing else, does make it more viable. And Farigiraf is also valuable even if Trick Room isn't up, because you could go for Imprison sets and stop your opponent from going from Trick Room, and maybe run like a Throat Spray set or like a Mental Herb set to guarantee you get up Trick Room. And this has some options. I think a Throat Spray especially is really valuable in giving this thing an offensive presence with stuff like Throat Spray plus either Psychic, Shadow Ball, or potentially the Dazzling Gleam. It's pretty viable. Apparently this thing gets a move called Twin Beam, which is getting used, which I'll be honest, oh, it's a dual target single move. Okay, that's cool. That's cool for getting on Sash sets, I guess. Actually, it's kind of decent, but the only Sash ones I can really think about resist or are immune to Twin Beam, so I wouldn't really personally advocate for it. But regardless, though, definite B tier. Oranguru is probably one of the best Trick Room options right now, and I'm actually going to give this an S tier. This might be a bit of a hot take. Actually, no, I'm going to give it A tier. Oranguru, actually, no, you know what? Yeah, I'm gonna give it A tier. I think that Oranguru has a little bit of an issue with having to compete with Farigiraf, but at the same time, I think that it's going to be a huge rise for this portion of the format, especially because I do think, in my opinion, it's a better Trick Room partner with Hariyama. But this has some decent merit. For example, you could run this thing with Safety Goggles plus Terra Dark, and you get around both Prankster taunts as well as the Amoonguss Spores, which are pretty cool. Two of the best ways to stop this, and I think that objectively speaking, people have got to stop running the Mental Herb set, because I think running the support move with the Safety Goggles and then going for Terra Dark to get around Prankster Taunt is the better route here. I don't know why people keep running other Terra types. Terra Dark is really a strong way because no one's really clicking a fighting move in Oranguru. So you're able to take advantage of that. And I think that Oranguru is something that with the partners you run it with stuff like Torkoal, for example, you could just get away with not Terraing Torkoal and just going for Eruptions and instructing it. And that will do more damage than a weakened Torkoal because you couldn't get up Trick Room. So I think that, again, people just got to get out of this notion of trying to go with like Terra Grass and Mental Herb and going for the one-time taunt when you can guarantee get around taunt forever and your Safety Goggles is not a consumable item here. Just a bit of an Oranguru rant. It's still a great partner though. It enables stuff like Belly Bolt as well with Bulldoze, and it's probably like the best way of doing so. Ultimately though, this is an A tier. Next up is Passimian, F tier. I'm gonna skip ahead a bit. F tier. We're gonna breeze through a lot of F tiers here really quickly. F tier. I'm not gonna talk on that one yet because I have actually some merit. F tier. Okay, that's really a lot of the F tiers that I have. Oh, F tier. Okay, now I'm done with pretty blatantly obvious F tiers for now. Mimikyu's kind of cool. I think this is a decent Trick Room mon in my opinion. Definite B tier. This has some cool support, and with stuff like Disguise being able to really get around a lot of stuff pretty easily, this is a strong Trick Room option, gets good priority. You can go with stuff like Sword Stance, which is enabling it offensively. You get some cool stuff like Taunt to stop other Trick Room options, and because you're not Prankster, it's not able to be blocked by Dark types. Overall though, this is a decent mon, definitely a B tier in my opinion. We have Corviknight. Corviknight is kind of just a D tier. I don't know, I think Corviknight's kind of whatever. Steel Flying typing I guess is good for walling stuff like Chomp, but at the same time though, I feel like Corviknight, if nothing else, it's just outclassed by like literally every other Tailwind option, and I don't think that I value the fact that this can wall Chomp when there's a lot better Chomp checks in terms of just competitive. So over that. Dreadnought, C tier, pretty good rain option. We're gonna rank all of the rain options right now as well. Where the fuck is Floatzel? Golduck as well, also will get a C tier. Actually, I'm gonna give Golduck a B tier, considering it's like the only viable special rain option in my opinion. Floatzel's cool, but it's definitely a more physical oriented one. But I guess in terms of the Dreadnought one, this is a cool Terra option, and with Terra Bug or just flying in general, you're great at getting around potential for random coverage. Floatzel I think is the better option than Dreadnought though, and I don't know why people aren't running it, because I think that honestly Floatzel with Wave Crash is a really strong route, and it's like literally the fastest weather sweeper. And it's one of those things where it's so naturally fast, if you can't get weather up or you can't keep it up, it will still be viable here. But Floatzel and Golduck, I think, are both legitimately good mons. As far as other weather options go, is Palafin on here? Palafin is on here. Palafin also gets a D tier. I think Palafin, if nothing else, a really good priority option for rain, while still hitting obnoxiously hard with Wave Crash in the rain. And this is actually, I'm gonna give Palafin B tier solely for the fact you have to switch it out first, which is really inconvenient. But once you do get Palafin going, it's probably the easiest snowball in this entire tier, and I don't think it's close. Just the restriction of having to commit to a turn 1 swap to have a mon that's just not getting thrown out easily, it's a little bit detrimental in my opinion. As far as the last rain option goes, Quaquaval gets a B tier as well. I think this is a really decent option personally. Quaquaval, if nothing else, has Aqua Step, which is really valuable outside of rain. This is just a mon that benefits from the damage output from it that rain does provide, as well as the manual tailwind that Pelipper also gives. So if nothing else, I think it's pretty valuable, and Quaquaval I think will honestly see a huge surge in usage in this season personally, especially when this mon, offensively speaking, can be paired with stuff like Amoonguss or even like wide guard support and get around checks like Psy Spam. It naturally also pressures Hydreigon pretty well, considering it's typically running Terra, Steel, or Fire, and you just close combat into it, and you never have to worry about drawbacks, which is a huge benefit, because for a lot of other Hydreigon checks, they do have to play that 50-50. For example, Armors, it's a check to Terra Steel, and it's a check to Terra Fire, but it's not a check to pre-Terra. With stuff like Fairies, yeah, it's a check to pre-Terra Hydreigon, but it's never checking post-Terra. Quaquaval as a fighting type never needs to worry about that, and with Aqua Step, it can even outpace it in Tailwind as long as you match your Tailwind. So I do think we'll see a huge rise in Quaquaval, but that might just be me. I will advocate that I'm a huge fan of them on. Colossal, definitely a B tier. I think it's a really easy sweeper still. Cole, I don't know why it's not getting more usage. In my opinion, Colossal is still a massive meta threat. I genuinely do not see why this thing is not getting used more, because Pull, I think, is also a decent enabler for this, and it pairs well with a lot of just common comps. So we'll give Cole a B tier. I think this will again get a huge rise this part of the format. Barrascuda, probably in my opinion actually the worst rain sweeper, and I'm gonna get into why. So Barrascuda, for one, despite the fact that this has the speed advantage on Floatzel, I think the fact that Floatzel hits harder with Wave Crash is already a huge benefit for it. Not only this, but I feel like as well that Barrascuda is way too, I don't know. Actually, that's a lie. I can't give it D tier. I'm actually going to give this thing B tier as well. Similar notes to Floatzel though. I actually forgot to mention this with the rains. I will say that the naturally high speed is pretty valuable. I do think that Wave Crash from Floatzel is a little bit better than Liquidation from Barrascuda. I think as well, on top of that, is that Floatzel being able to just spam water moves is pretty valuable. And again, they both similarly do get the same options of running their really high damage water move. You also get both of them having jet. Floatzel having Ice Spinner is pretty valuable for getting around terrain, because it can enable you to run your own jet, which is another reason I think this is better. And you don't really even need another attack. In my opinion, you just run those 3 and protect, and you're pretty okay. But I don't know. I think you can make a lot of merit, I guess, for Barrascuda. In hindsight, I'm actually going to lower both. No, I'm actually gonna stand by this. I think I'm gonna lower these both actually. Final answer. I do think that these are the 3 best rain options. Golduck, I will say, has a lot of the same viability as these 3, but it's the fact that it's the only special rain option that gives it the B tier. I think I've talked myself out of B tier for Floatzel and Barrascuda though. They're both probably about as valuable as Dreadnought. Anyway, Toxtricity with Terra Normal. I think a lot of people thought this would be better than it was, but it's still, if nothing else, a cool Tailwind option with Throat Spray. Easily a strong B tier in my opinion. I think that a lot of people just thought this thing would be more valuable than it is. Terra Ghost is just really good. Pincurchin, D tier. If nothing else, I will say, I've actually looked at Pincurchin potentially, even outside of just the potential for Paradox Mons in the future. But this thing is a cool Trick Room option. It's one of the slowest mons you could throw, and it's actually a mon that would underpace Torkoal, which is something to note, because there's not a lot of options that actually do underpace Torkoal, and you could potentially go for something like a Terra Electric set and actually just damage Torkoal before it gets eruptions off. So it is something to actually consider, in my opinion. I want to look into this mon a bit more for a future team comp for Trick Room, because I think it actually does have merit on Trick Room, as again, just a strong way to damage Torkoal pre-Terra, but I don't know, just in general post-Terra, especially if it's not Terra Ground, but we'll have to look into that. Definitely though, a mon with a lot of promise. Hatterene is pretty cool. If nothing else, I think that this could run a really good Terra set. You could run this thing with like just life up 3 attacks, and it's pretty decent. Just not as good as it used to be, because Expanding Force is no longer on its moveset. Definite C tier. Stonejourner, D tier solely because of power spot. Indeedee male, well, I'll do Indeedee male first. It's just a C tier, and it's solely because Indeedee female exists. This mon is objectively fine, though. It got a lot of good support this gen. Indeedee female, though, is going to be an S tier. This is a great follow me mon, one of the best follow me mons in the game, and it's also able to set up terrain, which is really valuable. And truthfully, though, if Indeedee female just never existed and it was only Indeedee male, while I think Indeedee male would be worse because of the slightly less bulk, Indeedee male would probably just be an A tier trick room support mon because it gets all the same support now that Indeedee female got. But Indeedee female is just male but better. This is a great Terra Fairy option. It's one of the best follow me supports. Psychic Seed into Psychic Terrain is also really good. Easy S tier. Copper Jaw is D tier solely because I think this thing has kind of good merit as a Terra trick room mon, and it has a lot of good coverage to boot as well. But it's actually not this. I'm gonna give it F tier. Pull is a solid A tier in my opinion. Pull's a pretty strong option. I will say if this thing kept Breaking Swipe, I think it would be an S tier because Breaking Swipe would be a lot more valuable support in this format, especially to scout stuff like Clear Amulet. But overall, I will say that Pull just kind of got fucked. Pull kind of got fucked in my opinion. I'll say it. This is a pretty cool Terra option though. Terra Ghost and Dragon are both valuable. Terra Fire as well is pretty good in VGC in my opinion for the random Terra Steel's little pop up. It's pretty cool band. You can run that thing with like Life Orb, Bogus Sash as well. It's great support for Cole, and it's probably the best activator of Cole in the format. Easily though an A tier option in my opinion. Borders S for sure. Baxcalibur is pretty cool. I think this thing is going to rise a lot in this gen. I'm going to give it an A tier for sure. I think in my opinion Baxcalibur has a lot of good Terra options as Terra Dragons do. The burn immunity is amazing for it. Loaded dice sets I think are going to be rising a lot. I see Clear Amulet as the most used item by a little bit, but loaded dice is honestly so monstrous right now with Icicle Spear. And then you go for stuff like Terra Fire for just random steel matchups. You go with stuff like Terra Electric for water matchups. It's basically just Terra coverage plus Icicle Spear. You don't really, I know people do run Terra Ice on this. I would not recommend it. I think you just go for the coverage route. But ultimately though, Bax is a really strong mon, and I think it will rise a ton this gen. It will continue to rise to like 10% plus. Up next, we have Paradox Mon. So we're going to go into Altaria. D tier, this is solely because of the fact that this is Perish Song, and I think that Altaria, if nothing else, does some cool options like Cloud9 being kind of valuable. I will say the Haze as well as stuff like Will-O-Wisp, random support this thing gets kind of insane. This will be a little bit more valuable in the D tier range still, but a little more valuable when a lot of the weather options come back. Stuff like, for example, Drill eventually, but more importantly, stuff like, for example, Basket Legion, because you could actually throw this next to a random Pokemon and go for some sort of random ways to take it out, or even just take out the weather. And I don't know. I feel like this thing, if nothing else, has some merit, I guess, as a Cloud9 mon, and that's what I'm trying to say. Cloud9 plus the random support. Up next is Armourouge. Armourouge is a solid S tier. One of the best offensive options right now. It's a great spread mon with Indeedee. It's really just the ultimate side spam mon because of Expanding Force, plus also the fact this is a great steal killer. Easily a nightmare for teams to play around. We're going to go into Belly Bolt. Belly Bolt is a strong trigger mon. I'm going to give this thing B tier. I think it's a little bit hard to pull off, but I think it does have some merit on stuff like Hail, for example, with Weather Ball, as Hybridron did. But ultimately, though, Parabolic Charge, I think is the best set. We'll be doing that later this week, actually, because I do think a Parabolic Charge Belly Bolt, I haven't seen it enough, and I'll be honest, I think it's a little bit of a crime because Parabolic Charge is such a great option with this policy, and it makes Belly Bolt pretty impossible to KO, actually. So again, team later on this week, you'll see it. I think the Belly Bolt is actually a strong B tier, though. Next up is Bombardier. Bombardier, I just don't think this mon is good. I'll be honest. I would love to be proven wrong. I think it's kind of a cool design, but this mon is just not good. It's just not good at all. Clodsire is just not good. Again, So I get why people would actually seek out Clodsire with the water immunity. Actually, I'm going to put this in D tier because you could potentially use this like a Terra Grass set, I guess, and then go for like Haze. Or actually, no, you'd probably go for like a Terra Fairy set with Haze and then go for Water Absorb. And you're just using it as a Dozo wall at that point, which I guess, but why burn Terra on Claude? There's a lot better, more consistent Dozo checks. This thing does get some cool support though, but ultimately just better option. Ceruledge I think is just worse Armourouge, but this is still a really strong attacker. I'm gonna give this thing an A tier. Clear Amulet on this thing is kind of demon. I know a lot of people are running this thing as pseudo Ceruledge on Armourouge with Terra Grass, but I do think a Terra Dark as a really good check to Armourouge is really valuable. And with Terra Blast at that point, you would have an actually really good way to get around side spam without having to worry about your priority being nuked. So I do think a Terra Dark also has some merit. There's a lot of good Terra types though on this mon, truthfully, that aren't really that exploited. So like Fire, Ghost are also valuable. You could potentially even go with random options like well, I don't know, I think it's probably about it. But the point being is I do think this is a valuable option, definitely a strong A tier physical attacker. We have Dash Bun. Dash Bunt gets, honestly, I'm going to give this thing a D tier. I think if nothing else, this thing has enough niche with the well-baked body and stuff like body press that it is kind of valuable. Get some cool support like Snarl, and I think this thing also gets Helping Hand. I know it gets Yawn, but the point being is enough of a support mon. I just think it's kind of gimmicky. You need to run less optimal moves, in my opinion, because instead of going for Armor Cannon, which will nuke teams with Armor Rouge, you're running fucking Lava Plume, which isn't terrible, but it's a lot more susceptible to just to Wide Guard, so easy D tier. Dondozo's a solid S tier, just kind of a really good mon, and I'm gonna give Tatsugiri the S tier as well. You might be thinking, why Tatsugiri also S tier? Doesn't Dondozo make it as good as it is? And you're right, but Tatsugiri is actually meritful on its own right, in my personal opinion. I think Rapsco was B tier, if I remember correctly. I'll have to check. If I put it, yeah, it was definitely B tier. We're gonna put Tatsugiri in the S tier. I think a Tatsugiri as well is kind of what makes Dondozo so good. The both in tandem are really valuable, and even outside of just commander strats, I think a Tatsugiri having the Scarf option to just outpace a lot of teams after Dondozo does faint is pretty good. And this thing has some good spread moves like Muddy Water, for example, that could actually make it valuable because it can potentially get around teams later on. Dondozo, on the other hand, is just a really good Terra machine. It has probably one of the most versatile Terra sets in the game, with stuff like Dragon, Water, Grass, Flying, Ground, Steel, all being pretty valuable on it. And these are just the really strong ones. There's some more niche stuff as well you can run on it, but ultimately these are just the 6 that I think are actually really valuable in Dondozo. Ultimately though, these two are really strong together. I just would love to see some more counterplay rising. Prankster shit. I don't know why it has that. Gardevoir is kind of cool. I think this is a B tier option for sure. It's a pretty strong Dondozo counter in my opinion, with stuff like Trace you could get around with Unaware and go for T-Bolt spam. Gardevoir also has some merit with like Telepathy for spread partners. You get stuff like Gleam and Terra Fairy, which is pretty cool. Trickery with Imprison, which is pretty cool. Willow support is pretty decent. Skill swap is also pretty good because you could trick a really bad ability like I don't know, maybe like Telepathy, I guess. But the point being, well, I guess bad in comparison to like Trace. The point being though is that Guard I think has a lot going for it. This is another mon I expect to rise a ton personally as the season goes on, but we'll have to see. Next up, we have Houndstone. Houndstone's kind of shit, but like, I don't know, I think it's D tier purely off the fact that Last Respects is good, but don't get it twisted. This rating is for Last Respects, it's not for Houndstone. I still think a Houndstone is kind of garbage. But Willow, I guess with Snarl is whatever, you really do only need to click Last Respects. It's still a shit mon, just a really broken move. Low kicks, I don't think low kicks is good in VGC, but it's whatever. Tinted Lens, I guess, hits hard. Mabastiff gets C tier off of Intimidate alone, and the fact that it's a pure dark typing, which is pretty good, but I think the Crook is a little bit better in that regard. Actually, I'm gonna give it D tier, because I do think, again, Crook is just outclassing in that regard. But this thing does have some cool merit. Stakeout is pretty cool, as well as Guard Dog is pretty cool, but it intimidates your best ability by a good amount, in my opinion. Next up, we have Mousehold. Mousehold is definitely an S tier. I will say, I get it. I really slept on this mon as far as even just thinking how good it would be in VGC. I did not think Mousehold would be as good as it was. Whether it's singles or doubles, I thought that the best is to be like a B tier doubles mon going into the gen, and I thought it would be like a really shit singles mon. I was wrong. This is a really good friend guard option. Follow me support is great. Terra Ghost sets have been great as well to get around potential random fakeouts, and it does actually pull them off very well despite being a support pick as far as burning at Terra goes. Population Bomb is really obnoxious with Terra Normal, but I do think objectively speaking, going for Terra Normal Population Bomb is using Mousehold wrong. I think that the friend guard sets with support and going for stuff like Follow Me is a lot better because this is a really good enabler with threats like Annihilate, Pod Dragon, etc. Still really good for Terra Normal, but I think just there's a lot better comps. Still really good S tier mon though. Really strong S tier, borderline S+. Annihilate, we're going to get into our first S+ here. Annihilate is, in my opinion, a really strong meta definer in this format. I think despite the fact that Sylveon's getting a lot more usage than it at this current moment, actually no, never mind, it's pretty much the same usage. I think Annihilate does define the meta a lot more, and it's one of the reasons why Sylveon can say it is so viable. Annihilate has a lot of good sets, whether it's Scarf Final Gambit, which is great. It's one of the best enablers to Tailwind and Trick Room combined, and it runs comps even on dual comps like that, because Scarf Annihilate is just that good at clicking Final Gambit. It's been a lot more predictable, I will say, though, because of the fact that people are just going for ghost types into this slot and assuming that it will run that on blatantly Tailwind or blatantly Trick Room teams, which is fine because this is also actually adapted past that and it's running leftovers Terra Fire sets or Terra Steel or whatever sets. And it goes with like Range Fist, Bulk Up, Drain Punch, and Protect. And that's also really strong because this is a really great way to get around a majority of the metagame, and Rage Fist is such a damning move, especially on such a bulky Pokemon. Defiant is an amazing ability to enable this for potential opposing Intimidate mons, as well as stuff like random Snarl or random Icy Wind options it can take advantage of, and then just boost its attack with Defiant because it really only cares about the attack stat and the bulk stats, which most random stat dropping moves don't really actually do, purposely at least. Ultimately though, easily one of the best mons in the format. Metacham's kind of whatever. I will say I think this is kind of cool. I guess with pure power just being a good breaker and a good fake out option, we'll give it D tier. We have Arboliva. Arboliva is actually kind of a decent mon in my opinion. This is a pretty good Dozo check I found actually with stuff like Rocky Helmet and Strength Sap. You can get around Dozo pretty easily and pop Seed Sower and do more damage with Giga Drain, or even just Terrain Pulse. In my opinion, I think Arboliva is actually a B tier mon. I really hope that we get this thing explored more this gen, because I think that Arboliva will actually be a strong option in VGC in my opinion. It's a cool Terra mon. It has a lot of good coverage with like Earth Power, Dazzling Gleam, as well as good support in Pollen Puff. It's a cool Threat Spray option with Hyper Voice. Ultimately, I think this is a good mon, objectively a good mon. B tier. We have Brambleghast. Brambleghast is shit. Don't run Brambleghast. Dunsparce. Dunsparce I also think is a C tier option, and this is something I think a lot of people are using wrong. I think the Gimmick set is kind of cool. Objectively speaking with Rattle, that it is a good way to make this work, but I actually have a set that we'll be using in tomorrow's video that I think will be better, and it gives a lot of viability I should say, to Hyperdrill, and where you would actually run this thing with Hyperdrill and Trick Room, and I think it does make it a really strong physical attacker. And you could run this with like a curse set to make sure you're even underpacing other Trick Room threats like Torkoal. And I know for a fact that no one else will actually take this information because it's too late to get the video out in time. Anyone who's watching this somehow by the time it caught algorithm, good luck and fun getting the video out before me. Ultimately though, I do think this is objectively a really strong way to use the Dunsparce though, and I think in the right team comp, this will be an actually really strong Nightmarish Pokemon. This is probably one of the better C tiers in my personal opinion actually, and again, that might be a bit of a hot take, but I think this mon has a lot of variance, and truthfully, we will see a lot of the Dunsparce doing well. Well, remember, it's not a lot, but I think we'll see a Dunsparce get like a strong tournament finish this gen. Mark my words. Anyway, on to the next mon. We have Garganacl. Garganacl's pretty strong, decent B tier in my opinion. I will say, I think that Garganacl's definitely fallen off a bit as far as its really strong usability. It's still a good Terramon, but I think that dedicating the Terra slot to Garganacl in a lot of matchups isn't the best, though this thing does still have a lot of merit with going like Terra Ghost because of the fact that your ability resists Ghost. It's great to get an immunity status, and I think truthfully this is probably one of the best options in B, if not the outright best option in B tier. I think that the A tiers are a little bit more consistently valuable, but Garganacl does have some good merit because it's one of those really slow Pokemon that doesn't need Trick Room to be up inherently to be valuable, so we'll give it B tier. Actually, that's a lie. I'm going to give it A tier. I'm going to give it A tier. I think if nothing else, this is another one of those really good wide guard monsters I was talking about with Hariyama, and it's probably one of the only ones that gives it a lot of competition for clicking wide guard, so I think that alone actually gives it A tier. We'll go into Goldengo next. This is our second S+. Goldengo is one of the best mons in the format as far as special attacker goes. In fact, it is probably the outright best special attacker in the format. Having immunity to status of any kind is really valuable. You're also immune to status moves, though this does hurt in the case of Helping Hand, which is whatever. It's a great Specs and Scarf option, great with Life Orb. Apparently Citrus sets are being ran, I guess. Apparently Weakness Policy sets are being run, I guess. One thing I'm kind of shocked is that Assault Vest isn't on here, because I feel like this is bulky enough as an offensive piece to be a good Assault Vest mon, though that might just be because of how physically offensive the meta is leaning. It's a great Terra option too, with stuff like Terra Ghost and Steel both being valuable, though personally I love the fact of not tearing turn 1 because you can get around Fake Out this way, and this does make it a good option for those Fake Out cores, and just going for stuff like Steel Beam on Specs variants for your Trick Room Sweeper while having Hariyama be unable to Fake Out you is pretty valuable. Ultimately though, one of the best mons in the format this gen in my opinion. It's probably going to be the only S+ that I think will consistently stay S+ even when the home mons come out, because I do think that our other two Explorers annihilate is one, but we do have one other S+ in this list, which for anyone who plays a lot of VGC, this might seem obvious to you, but I'm going to keep it suspenseful for those who don't. But ultimately, I think a Goldengo is the only one I think will definitively keep the spot all gen. Annihilate, I think, might end up creeping down a little bit as the format ages on, but it will still be valuable. And I think that I guess I said it, so I guess we'll go into it now. Meowscarada is our third S+ Pokemon, which, funny enough, I don't actually see it on here. Where the fuck? Oh, no, it's right here. Okay. So Meowscarada, I guess it would have been coming up soon anyway, but Meowscarada is our third S+. For anyone who's wondering, Meowscarada is probably one of the best Dondozo answers. However, I will say, unlike Gallade, Gallade does have a lot of benefit in terms of being able to handle a lot of its Terra types. Meowscarada is really only good at breaking water in this regard, which isn't a bad thing because there's a lot of matches where Dondozo maybe not able to go for Terra, and Water Dondozo also has a pretty common Terra type on it. So it's not a bad thing. It's a great trick room option. It's a great, really fast option too. The priority on this is amazing. Typically, this is actually a really good overgrow mon because you're actually able to benefit from keeping the immunity to stuff like Rage Powder and Spore while also keeping the immunity to stuff like Taunts, which is really valuable, or other Prankster Pokemon may be going for T-Wave. So this has a lot of merit in that regard. It's a really good offensive piece. Typically, it's ran with Focus Sash, though Band and Life Orb both do have merit here. Ultimately, though, this is probably one of the better physical offensive threats this gen. I think, though, of the 3 in this tier, this will be the first to fall off. The second that Dondozo stops running Terra Water, this will no longer be the most used Pokemon. And I think as well, especially when teams find different Trick Room options, like already speaking with stuff like Hariyama or Nguru being a pretty viable option, as well as Hariyama with Fraygraph being a viable option. I think that Meowscarada's option as a fast Trick Room option will also fall a little bit. I still think it'll be a top 10, top 20 used mon, at least until home comes, when Incineroar inevitably comes back and steals a lot of this thing's usage. But even still, I think this will always be a viable mon this gen, just objectively speaking, it's the first to fall of these 3 in my opinion. Annihilate might keep its rank. I think Gholdengo definitely will. Meowscarada, I think, give it 3 months and it will no longer be an S+. Still gonna be a good mon though. We have a lot of Paradox mons, but we have Glamora up next. This gets C tier purely for the fact that Toxic Debris is kind of cool for getting around Dondozo, though just run Skeletors. It's a better option. Same as a lot of other Dondozo counterplay. Next up, we have Kilowattrel. Kilowattrel is a solid B tier option. Pretty good manual Tailwinder. I do think that Talonflame does outclass it significantly though. But Kilowattrel has 3 really valuable abilities in my opinion, being Volt Absorb, Competitive, and also Wind Power, all 3 of which actually are valuable. I know the Volt Absorb is the least used, but I think it has some good merit, especially next to Discharge Spam, as we saw with the Raichu video, but that's pretty gimmicky, I will admit. But ultimately, this is a great partner for stuff like Garchomp, Gholdengo, Meowscarada, etc., to where I can't warrant not putting this in the B tier. We're going to be going into next Kingambit. Kingambit is a solid A tier. I don't care what anyone says. Kingambit forever, one of the best cleaners. This is truthfully one of, if not the best late game mods. Actually, I'm going to put this in the S tier. Kingambit truthfully is, in my opinion, the definition of the ultimate late game Pokemon. Especially with Supreme Overlord being such a good ability, but even still, Defiant sets are amazing. Despite the fact that a lot of Intimidators are not going around in that same essence that they used to be, it's still a really deadly Pokemon, and I think a lot of teams are going to have to be very prepared for this. It's something that I think a lot of teams outright need a Kingambit answer for, which isn't the hardest thing to do. It's just a good fighting type or a good like electric type for Terra Flying sets, and making sure just you have a means of getting around it, which these come in a lot of common forms. For example, for Terra Flying sets, Rock Slide is one of the most common moves in VGC because of the fact it can flinch things so easily and dual target. So you already have that set covered. Fighting is pretty common between stuff like Gallade or even just random Terra fighting stuff. You also have, as far as the dual stabs go, you have Montek Brillium, for example, which are pretty valuable, Hariyama, or even just for the random Terras with either one of Dark, for example, you have stuff like Sylveon, or Steel, you have stuff like Terra, Fire, Hydreigon. So it's not exactly too impossible to get around this mon, just objectively speaking, you typically do need to burn a Terra or bring a fighting type, which isn't the worst because it's pretty common in a lot of these mons to burn the Terra anyway. Regardless, still an easy S tier. Up next, we do have Oinkologne, F tier. Scovillain is going to be a C tier. I think this is probably one of the best Sunsweepers right now as far as a Chlorophyll mon goes. However, I do think that Scovillain is a little bit hard to bring. I think even on teams where I'm running it, I would rather bring Lilligant truthfully because I think the after is more valuable as far as support goes. But it's still, in my opinion, the second best. We have stuff like Rage Powder, which is kind of cool actually on a Chlorophyll mon. Your stabs in Fire and Grass being natural stabs is pretty good, and you could throw this like a Terra Fairy set and handle stuff like Hydreigon matchups and force it into the Terra 50-50, which again is pretty valuable. Ultimately though, I think it's just a little bit too niche for my liking. Definite C tier though. We have Squawkabilly. This thing gets D tier solely for its abilities, and we'll end the discussion of that. We have Orthworm up next. This gets C tier. It's a pretty cool slow Tailwind pivot. Not Tailwind, Shed Tail pivot. And ultimately, the ground immunity is actually extremely valuable on this. You get stuff like Body Press as well, which is pretty decent. And with Terra Electric, you can get no weaknesses. However, I think a Terra Fighting is also a decent option. Same as Terra Steel. But ultimately, this is really just a support mon. At heart. And I guess speaking of Shed Tail options, we'll go into Cyclizar, which I actually think is the worst option in doubles, solely for the fact that I think, if nothing else, Orthworm's natural steel typing is valuable, and I would never consider burning a Terra on Cyclizar or Orthworm to be fair. but I think Orthworm, if nothing else, has a little bit more merit there. And also the ground immunity is pretty cool. So we'll give Orthworm a C tier, and I'm going to give Cyclizar a D tier. Up next, we do have Electrode, shit. Sudowoodo, shit. Fortress, shit. I'm going to tier all of the F tiers right now, actually, that are left over. Houndoom, shit. No, I'm actually not going to put Donphin there. Stantler, shit. We have Swalot, shit. Shit. We're going through a lot of the F tiers because we're so far into this video, and I have a lot of stuff that is outright unpurposeful, unreasonable to even consider using. So I'm gonna burn through all these mons right now. We're gonna shit. So many of these. Oh my god, what was this tier riddled with? No. Shit. Shit. And that's about it. That's actually no. Wugtrio. Nice try, little fucker. You slid right in there. Quillfish. Quillfish gets a C tier purely because of Intimidate, and also the fact that this is a decent sponge, just like Azu, which is pretty viable right now. And it's just the water poison typing is kind of cool. Also the fact that this gets Haze is pretty decent as far as Intimidate goes. Apparently this has 0% usage. I feel like this actually is a pretty okay option for D tier. I don't know why people aren't using Quillfish. I feel like this has a lot going for it with stuff like Intimidate and Haze being both viable. I feel like this could be a good Dozo counter with stuff like Terra Grass, I guess, or I don't know. I feel like this has merit. I'm curious to see why people aren't using it, but I feel like this, if nothing else, is better than a lot of the D tiers. This at least has purpose. Heracross is D tier purely because of the fact that its typing is kind of cool, and I feel like this again could be useful in stuff like Tailwind comps with Guts, and similarly to stuff like Hariyama, its immunity to burn is pretty valuable. Donphan gets D tier solely for the fact that I think this has a lot going for it as far as a Trick Room option. This has some cool options too with like Ice Shard for priority, Ice Spinner to remove terrain, High Horsepower is a good single target ground move. D tier for sure, but it's probably a decent D tier. Raichu gets a C tier. I will say Raichu would have totally been an A tier if it kept Electro Web, but I learned this recently. Raichu does not keep Electro Web, which is fucking dumb. Smaller should have kept it. Ultimately, that was still valuable. You could run stuff like Lightning Rod sets, and that could be good, especially in partnership with mons like Kilowattrel. Nuzzle is pretty good support. Vigot's great support. Ultimately, this is just a okay support mod in this gen. No longer has as much offensive viability, and Electro Web being gone is pretty bad for it. Slacking gets the C tier, as I mentioned, solely for the fact that it's benefiting a lot from Doodle, but really, if you're not pairing this thing to a change its ability, objectively, it's a shit mon. Otherwise, you could just run this thing with, like, Doodle, and you can kind of make it work with stuff like random Body Slam, Bulk Up. Apparently, this thing is running Terra Ghost as well. I found this the other day. It's running Terra Ghost, and that's pretty cool for it, to be honest. Good for slacking. Zangoose is D tier solely for the poison for the immunity to status with its ability, as well as the fact that it's a kind of okay Terra option, I guess, and it's a kind of a cool offensive trigger mon, in my opinion. Wigglytuff gets, actually, does Wigglytuff keep Ally Switch? This is the whole deciding factor of it being D or F tier. Ally, it does not keep Ally Switch. F tier. Never mind, I missed this thing in F tier. Drifblim gets a C tier for sure. If nothing else, Unburden plus the support things this gets is pretty valuable. You could definitely run this as a cool seed mon, and that's something, I guess. Still a C tier for certain. Bronzong gets a B tier. This is a pretty cool trick mon in my opinion, this gen. I feel like Bronzong as well does get a lot going for it. Actually, no, I'm gonna give this thing C tier. This gets a lot going for it as far as stuff like Terra Fighting sets, Body Press. You can go with Terra Steel sets and just, or even Terra Psychic sets and gain your fighting resistance back. Ultimately, though, I feel like it's just better trick room options. Stuff like Oranguru and Forgraph come to mind, but it's still not terrible if your team's Bronzong worthy. The next up we have the Spiritomb. Where the fuck did I draw? Oh, it's Spiritomb's right up here. This gets D tier solely because I know for a fact this thing does keep Ally Switch, which that alone plus its one weakness is D tier worthy in my opinion. Abomasnow is a pretty good mon actually. I think this is actually a legitimate A tier. In my opinion, it's pretty comparable to Tyranitar. It's a great Dozo check to a lot of different Dozo typings, whether dragon, flying, water, you name it. This is a check to like half the common Dozo Terra types. And on top of that as well, the Veil support this gets is amazing. The fact this sets weather is also pretty cool. Though ultimately, I don't think a snow as a sweeping route with like Satitan is good. So we'll actually go into Satitan right now. I'm going to put that in the C tier. Satitan's cool, and I think it benefits from Abomasnow being good, but in itself, Satitan is kind of average. But Abomasnow though is great, and I think it's even valuable as far as a not Hail Team route, because you can run this thing with like Garchomp and shit and be a really good enabler for teams. Or even run it with like Baxcalibur and enable Baxcalibur to just be bulkier, but it doesn't have to be a Hail Team, it could just be a team that has both the, like 2 ice types. And that's really what it comes down to, just run it with 2 ice types, not as a Hail Team. Weavile is kind of cool. This is a decent enough fake out option. I'm going to give it C tier. It's fast, which is benefiting it. I will say, as the meta does fasten up with other Pokemon, Weavile will get worse, but that's just to be expected. When we get better fake out mons, like Incineroar, for example, this will worsen, to be expected. When we get better speed control, it'll worsen, to be expected. Magnezone's D tier, if nothing else. I think Magnezone, just having stuff like Spread Discharge and being a cool Trick Room option, also speed control with Electro Web. It's whatever. Cool Terraplast option, great for trapping steals, I guess. Magnezone also, if I remember correctly, does not keep Valley Switch. Unfortunate. Still D tier. Arcanine is an A tier, definitely one of the best Intimidate mons in the format right now. It just misses out on S tier purely because of Clear Amulet being so good, but this is, in my opinion, the epitome of Intimidate. Also gets a lot of good support, stuff like Helping Hand and Snarl, both are really good. Banded with Terra Normal is also really good. It's a pseudo Dragonite, but a little bit faster naturally. Ultimately though, Arcanine is a definitive A tier mon. Palma gets C tier solely for Revival Blessing, and also the fact that it gets Fake Out on top of that, which is why I'm putting in, actually I'm gonna put it in B tier. I put Rapskin in B tier, we'll put Palma in B tier. They're both pretty similarly viable in my opinion, just the support they offer is vastly different. You would probably use Palma more on a Tailwind team. Rapskin is literally the Trick Room equivalent though. They're both valuable though. I just think they're pretty equal in skill. Claw purely gets D tier because of Anger Shell, and you could run this, I guess, with some Redirection, and again, we'll just leave that at that. Next up is Skeledurge. Skeledurge is a strong A tier option. I think the Unaware makes this thing such a good Dozo counter. Terra Grass is amazing. Terra Fairy is also amazing. This is literally one of the best offensive Pokemon as far as Trick Room goes, in my opinion. At least in the special end. Sylveon objectively outclasses it though, but this is still a strong option in my opinion. Skeledurge having Unaware though is great for other setup mons. This is a really obnoxious Pokemon to KO. You get Slack Off too to keep your own sustain. Really strong A tier, and I think this is probably one of the best in the tier. You could make a case for this thing being S tier in my opinion. We have 3 mons left. We're gonna put Toedscruel in the D tier. I'm gonna skip over that one right now because it's the easiest. Toedscruel literally is only here because it gets Trigger and Rage Powder, and that's the only thing keeping it in from the F tier. Even still, Mycel and Might is really shit. And if we had Toedscool on here, this would actually be ranking higher because of a Violet. It makes it bulkier, and we put that in C tier. But it's not there, so just keep that as a mental note. Tinkaton, and Veluza. Well, Veluza's gonna get the D tier as well, just because it's really gimmicky, but Final Gambit's kind of cool, and Fillet Away with proper support is pretty cool. But Tinkaton's gonna get a B tier. This is a pretty decent mon in my opinion. You got stuff like Gigaton Hammer, and also with the Mold Breaker getting around potential for Inner Focus mons, and just being a guaranteed fake out route here is really good. Gigaton Hammer is strong nuke. You get stuff like Knock Off and Play Off really strong. Assault Vest is probably the best item on this, but you still get some merit with stuff like Metal Coat, Air Balloon, Safety Goggles, Citrus Berry, etc. Ultimately, this is a really good fake out mon, probably one of the most consistent ones in the tier, purely just because of Mold Breaker. But that's gonna be your tier list. I'm so sorry this video was an hour and a half long. That's why I skipped over a lot of the F tiers as we went on. But let me know your guys' thoughts. And if there's a mon maybe I skipped over and I just forgot to list here because it wasn't on the initial tier list, let me know down below and I'll give you guys in the comment section my personal rating for that Pokemon. And if you guys have your own tiering opinions on this as well, I would love to see them and I would love to discuss them with you guys. If you guys enjoy, leave a like below and subscribe for more content just like this. Shoutouts to channel members being Josh, aka Ultra Player, Mia, Zeke Zero, Matt O'Shea, Nox Nocturnal, and Koemi. Your guys' support is extremely appreciated, and if you want to become a channel member today for bonus content, the link to that is down below, as well as the Twitter and Discord to stay up to date on future content. I'll see you guys in tomorrow's video where we're going to be using the Dunsparce team. Until then, peace out, guys.